Hello everyone. Thank you for the joining Privacy Talk. I'm so glad and honored to invite Marv. Actually, she's now in Japan, in Tokyo. So, Marv, thank you for joining interview today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Excited to do this in Tokyo in person.
Yeah, though it's so honored to have a conversation with you this time. Before jumping into the agenda, I'd like to share her profile. Merve Hickok is the President and Research Director at the Center for AI and Digital Policy, deeply engaged in the global AI policy regulatory work. Kaid educates AI policy practitioners and advocates across 80 plus countries and advises international organizations such as European Commission, UNESCO, the Council of Europe, OECD. Marv is a policy expert with testimony to the US Congress. Marv is currently in Tokyo as a Hitachi Council on Foreign Relations Fellow and a visiting AI researcher at Henkaku Center of Chiba Institute of Technology. She is researching Japanese approach to AI policy and governance. Marv is also the founder of AIassist.org, focusing on the impact of AI systems on individuals and society, particularly the impact of fundamental rights, democratic values, and social justice. She has been recognized by a number of organizations, most recently with Lifetime Achievement Award, Women in AI of the Year 2023, and as one of the 100 brilliant women in AI ethics in 2021. She provides a consultancy and training to C-suite leaders and public and private organizations on responsible AI development, due diligence, and governance. Previously, Marv held various senior roles in Fortune 100 companies for more than 15 years. Please check out her website, aiethics.org. So thank you for joining again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the kind introduction as well.
Yeah, indeed. So let's get started today's agenda. I'd like to explore your activity. As I introduced on your profile, you had a very excellent experiences in AI ethics. So could you tell us why did you start to work in the AI and ethics field?
Yeah, of course. So as you mentioned, I was working in Fortune 100 companies uh, previously. So in my previous life, I was in the corporate world for more than 15 years. And one of my roles was with Bank of America Merrill Lynch. So I was working in London and responsible for recruitment technologies for Bank of America. And this was around 2011, 12. So AI per se wasn't too much in the recruitment systems, but we were already starting to see some of the algorithmic bias conversations. And I was also in charge of, with my team, providing unconscious bias and bias training to the like hiring managers, to other recruiters, etc. So it was very serendipitous that that role and my responsibilities came together. And when I saw algorithmic bias possibilities in recruitment, I asked where else, like in what other domain, bias could surface in algorithms. That turned out to be every single domain that we can think of. So I started doing a lot of research, asking questions, and then I decided to resign from my role at the bank, and found AIethicist.org. Uh, the initial thing was to share resources with others who might be that new to the field. The field itself was very new at the time, but I also wanted to share resources, and then the rest is history.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the great history. And you mentioned that now you work on the AI ethicist. And besides that, you are taking in charge of the Center for AI and Digital Policy now. So could you share about your company and law, what you were doing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So AIethicist.org, like I said, started as a way to share practices, good practices, emerging practices, and resources on algorithmic bias, accountability. But then I also started a few years ago providing responsible AI training and consulting to both public and private entities. So I have clients ranging from startups to Fortune 100, as well as federal ministries and government agencies, all working on responsible AI. And at the Center for AI and Digital Policy at CIDP, we're an independent education and research nonprofit, and our focus is really providing research, education, and advice on AI policy and regulation, always to protect and advance human rights, democratic values, and rule of law. So, as you mentioned in the intro, we've been a trusted and independent nonprofit in this space, working on AI policy for several years now. And then we work with likes of OECD, UNESCO, United Nations, Council of Europe, the whole abbreviations. But very excited to be in this space.
Yeah, that's amazing. Then we got a lot of reference from your organization that was very supportive for AI experts to run the progressions of how AI political discussion is coming through your papers. That I strongly recommended all the privacy experts should read it. So in addition, you are in Tokyo now, thanks to the programs of the Council on Foreign Relations Fellow by Hitachi, and also you involved as researchers of Henkaku Center, which has been organized one of the Japanese famous researchers and entrepreneur at the Chiba Institute University. So what do you research in the US and in Japan AI policy project at this moment?
Uh, First of all, I'm really excited to be here in Tokyo. This is a dream come true, and it's an incredible opportunity to experience the culture, meet many friends that I've been like connected online for years, but also meeting with new professionals who have been working in the space. So I'm really thankful to Hitachi and Council on Foreign Relations for providing me with the fellowship, and Henkaku Center under Chiba Institute of Technology for being giving me the space to research this as well. I'm really lucky for this. What I'm trying to do with the research is really understanding uh, what motivates Japan in its work in AI policy and governance globally, domestically, and globally. Japan has been very active in initiating AI policy conversations, AI governance conversations since 2015. And it's not only on initiating, but also like in taking, like creating consensus on that approach. And my research focuses on understanding the cultural, geopolitical, and social priorities that shapes Japan's approach. Why is Japan doing what it is doing? And what is the impact globally on rulemaking, international rulemaking?
Yeah, that's very important to know each other in different regions, then developing of the AI policy and lawmaking to harmonize the collaboration in the sphere of the AI space. So I think that your research is a very significant role, and I'm happy to check the upgrade and how that works through your own staying in Japan. So thank you for sharing your great experiences.
Thank you, and I hope
Um,
to be an ambassador for Japan's work as well. Because if you're in the AI pulse, if you have been in the field for long enough, you know Japan's impact. But the more recent, for new recent incomers, it's more subtle. So I want to make sure that I'm able to amplify Japan's work as well.
Thank you. Um, and the next question is about the transitions, because you had a long time experiences in AI space, and you also involved in some of the important law in US lawmaking processes in AI at this moment. From your experiences, so how has the AI policy and the governance discussion in the US has been since started you involved in this space?
Uh, it's been an interesting ride. So when we first started several years ago, the conversations on AI policy and governance, and I'm talking, um, like really around AI policy, regulations, and governance piece. So those were within a very small group of policymakers, academics, and civil society organizations. It was a very small group. The White House, Office of Science and Technology, NIST, and a handful of lawmakers at the time were involved. We at CAIDP were also more involved at what was happening at OECD, Council of Europe, with like helping to draft the first AI treaty. In fact, the AI treaty is going to open for signature this week, so very excited about that. And then, likes of UNESCO, we've been involved with European Parliament on the EU AI Act. But in the US, that conversation again like was evolving but small. One of the major shifts in the US has been over the years a better understanding of privacy, bias, and explainability issues or black box issues. So over the years, more people started asking questions around this. We had more reports coming up, and the lawmakers started asking really like in-depth questions. Um, which was great. So you're not starting every conversation from the basics. The level of conversations, the depth of conversations really improved over the years. Then came generative AI. For better or worse, it definitely took the conversation to a different level in the policy space. Congress started getting more interested. Policymakers first didn't want to be left behind on the conversation, but also they did not want to repeat the mistakes of not regulating social media. So if you were involved in or like watching the conversations on social media, hearings, testimonies in the US Congress or at large over the last decade, decade and a half, um, those were really like very different level of conversation than what we have for AI. So the policymakers don't want to repeat the mistakes. And I had the honor of testifying in the US Congress in beginning of March 2023, at March 8th. I want to be very specific because this was like after ChatGPT, but 1 week before the release of GPT-4. And this was one of the first congressional hearings. And the question for the hearing, like the title for the hearing was if US was ready for an AI revolution and whether US should regulate. And my response was that we are not ready. We need guardrails, public education, and expertise in government. Um, and more or less, my like fellow, the others testifying in that same panel, more or less agreed as well. And since then, both the House and the Senate held many, many hearings on AI policy, on different topics, as well as White House, NIST, etc. And then latest, we had the executive order, which required every single federal department and agency to be involved in AI conversations. So we're in a very different, right now, like with that transformation over time, we are in a very different space in the US policymaking than where we were with social media.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the brief history, then how it has been discussed in the space in the US. And also, next topic is about the privacy and data, which means you involved in some of the discussion, not just only in US, but also the some of the European regime, such as the European Commissions and the international organizations, just like UNESCO, I spoke at your introduction. So there is a lot of conversation in the Western countries then how they can create a trusted AI and integration. And so could you share about any latest trend and what kind of the discussion will be happens and what kind of the discussion can be happens in a like next term. So could you share about the insights?
Yeah, absolutely. And if possible, I want to take a bit of a wider lens and start with end of 2023, actually. As you're aware, under Japan's presidency, G7 countries adopted Hiroshima AI framework for advanced AI systems, which includes high-level principles for governance and code of conduct for companies developing these advanced systems. Since then, the G7 presidency has shifted, but Japan has been very influential in starting Friends of Hiroshima process group. So the framework at this point is adapted by, last time I checked, by more than 50 countries. So it hasn't stayed with that, like 7 countries plus EU. It has been adopted by more and more countries, which is a great thing to have, in terms of international cooperation and interoperability and understanding of the same principles. Since the beginning of the year, EU finally agreed on EU AI Act after 3.5 years of since the publication of the draft. EU is now working on AI Office, um, getting that in place and functioning, and identifying the national agencies in charge. As you know, EU AI Act requires each country, each member country, to assign a national authority, and that might be different from one country to another. So all the countries are right now making that decision. And then EU is also working on developing the code of conduct because some of the regulation is going to be is requires some voluntary code of conduct alignment. So that's what's happening in the EU. In the US, in addition to what's happening in Congress and with like federal agencies like FTC, FEC, SEC, uh, a lot of states have passed AI legislation as well. So for those interested, I would definitely suggest the Colorado, Connecticut, and hopefully soon California ones to kind of look at what is being legislated. And within the Congress, there are actually a few narrow AI legislation, especially on disinformation and deepfakes, that is moving forward. And then I would, in terms of like overall uh, international developments, I mentioned Council of Europe Treaty on AI, which is the first international treaty on AI, will open for signature on September 5th. And as an expert civil society organization, we've been working on the drafting of this for several years with member states and observer states. And in comparison to product safety or liability laws, and I would consider EU AI Act as sort of a product safety bill, the focus is of the treaty is to protect human rights, international relations, sorry, protect human rights, rule of law, and democracy. And then maybe one final thing to highlight is the African Union, which very recently published its continental AI strategy. So now we have a continent-wide strategy, which the African Union member states are supposed to move forward.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. As my curiosity, the US and the EU, the both is working on the different angles of the AI strategy at this moment. So from your perspective, so what the kind of the political difference that both of the country, just like the EU is strictly regulated from Japanese perspective, the US is much more flexible for the AI and tech innovation. So do you think there is any kind of the gaps between the both of the regions for the AI policy making?
I wouldn't say gap, and it will be, this is really, when I talk about the differences between US and EU, I always try to highlight the differences in legal systems. So US and EU are on very different legal systems, so that drives their policy, uh, actions and regulations. So in the EU, if you do not have written regulations on something, you cannot keep organizations, public or private entities, accountable for liability, safety, etc. So it has to be written in the books. Therefore, you're seeing EU always going to like written regulations, hard law, etc. In the US, the legal system is different. We do not need um, that granularity in legislation. In the US, you make a law, and then the relevant agency, federal agency who's in charge of enforcement of that regulation, has more space, more flexibility in terms of the actual rulemaking or like the details. So as it stands, US and many other countries have, for example, equality laws, right? Consumer protection laws, non-discrimination laws, uh, product safety laws, etc. So there's already existing regulations in the US and existing agencies like FTC, like SEC, who are already empowered to enforce these. So it will be wrong from a legal system point of view to expect US to have that granular level of legislation in the US. What we do expect, what we do want is, okay, here's what we already are legislating in the US. Are there um, other like emerging risks, emerging issues that are specific to AI that we need more regulations? So, black box algorithms is one, right? Contestation around transparency and contestation around algorithms is another. Um, Bias is another issue. How do you take a company or a public entity to the court and ask them to be transparent about their algorithms and respect IP rights? So those are the new issues that AI brings to the table that we need to deepfakes and disinformation. So it's not like we don't have regulations in the US. That will be a very wrong assumption. We have very, very strong agencies and existing regulations. So it's really up to those agencies and the gaps in legislation that we should focus on.
Yeah, sharing. Thank you for sharing. That's been very insightful for the Japanese Asian perspective, what happens in a Western country, especially for the policymaking, the enforcement, which is clearly important to make sure the how the AI world becoming the change and the shift in the next decades. So as for the future landscape, you made some comments on the article, the Hill, the one of the important, one of the famous media, and recent, and then you have the published on the organization about the ChatGPT. As you mentioned, the FTC is a key players in enforcement in US, and maybe these government authority has the like key elements to protect fundamental rights of the AI. And its coming president election might affect in this decision making in the future. So as the next question, how should FTC act on ChatGPT and president election effects in it in the future?
Really appreciate that question because CIDP has been one of the most active players in advocating for establishing rules and accountability for generative AI vendors. And I specifically say vendors and products because at the end of the day, They are vendors, they are products, and we need to be looking at the business practices, fair business practices, and making sure that those practices are also both fair and non-deceptive. So like I mentioned earlier, GPT was released mid-March 2023. And at the end of the March last year, only a couple of weeks later after it was deployed, we at CIDP completed an extensive analysis of GPT-4 and its impact on several key areas. We then submitted a 46-page complaint to the Federal Trade Commission on OpenAI and its product GPT-4. Beginning a few months later, beginning of July 2023, we submitted a new evidence to FTC, so there was an additional complaint. And then in mid-July, only a few days after that second complaint, New York Times reported that the agency had launched the investigation that we requested. However, 1 year later, we're still waiting for the finalization of that investigation. We recently published a 1 year report on this. And our main concerns, what we want FTC to act upon were and still are bias, transparency, privacy, public safety, children's safety, data protection, cybersecurity, and deception risks. And in between, some of OpenAI employees also published an open letter warning about the lack of oversight and a lot of opaqueness about their product. And then we had, in the process, many data protection agencies in Italy, Canada, Korea, Brazil, Germany, Spain, and Japan who published significant concerns, and some of them had investigations. So I want to reiterate that GPT is a product, right? So GPT-4 is a product, and both individual and business consumers deserve better guardrails, governance, and accountability. We want to be able to use these products where it benefits us, where it creates new opportunities, etc. But it shouldn't be down to the individuals and business consumers to take all of the risk that OpenAI has not put guardrails, right? So they have some responsibility. So we asked the FTC to complete this investigation with urgency. And regarding the elections, this matters, right? Because the likes of these products, whether it's like language or image or voice or video generation products, all have an impact on the elections. So we at CIDP also joined a number of civil society organizations asking the Federal Election Commission for rulemaking. And the focus there was like fraudulent misrepresentation with the use of generative AI systems. And what we asked the Federal Election Commission is transparency on development, deployment, and use of AI systems for public communications and campaign advertising. So concerns around deepfakes, disinformation, amplification of biases, and political micro-targeting, as well as misinformation. So hallucinations cause misinformation, cause people to voters and other people get wrong information from these systems. And we've already seen in the US and in other countries as well, many examples of deepfakes already being used in the political advertising or election cycle. So we are still very concerned because there is not enough guardrails around this. And as I mentioned, there are a few bills in the US Senate and Congress to focus on this, like deepfake and disinformation regulation. And in the meantime, Federal Communications Commission banned robocalls using deepfake voice clones. So there is some movement in there, but we definitely need more. And as a final note, I would just say that this is not a US only problem. Every single country is subject to the same risks. But the protection layers are very different.
Yeah, in a recent article, I just checked in some of the latest updates in California, where the providing the bills and maybe just in happens a decision in a few months later, maybe actually, maybe against of the federal level, maybe just in a state level, discussion might be realistic just for the privacy regulations in California is becoming so strict. If you have any opinion about the state level against of ChatGPT or any other generative AI might be happens under the legislative process. So could you share about if you have any of that?
Yeah, sure. And I would say like a wider legislative process at state level. So in the US, as some of you might be familiar, we have the federal regulation that covers all US as a federal entity. But then you have the state level regulations and even city level regulations as well. So we have seen this scenario of, or like a parallel with privacy regulation, right? So we do not have a federal privacy regulation in the US, unfortunately. Uh, but we need one. We need privacy regulations and data protection. So what happened over the years is each state took it upon themselves to pass privacy regulations, data protection regulations. Some of them have been like copy paste from one state and another. Some of them, like Illinois and California, are quite extensive. But the states didn't want to wait for U.S. Congress to act, and which is a slower process. So we're seeing a similar parallel with AI legislation, um, predictive AI as well as generative AI. States have started bringing up um, proposals, as well as, again, California is usually the lead in some of these discussions. So we're seeing more activity in California, but more and more states are passing AI legislation. My worry is fragmentation, and I think it is a worry for different companies as well, because if you have one federal regulation, you know um, what you need to abide by. There's one regulation, you can put your systems and governance mechanisms in place. When you're dealing with 50 different regulations with slight variations, it is harder on business. It is a need, it has to be in place, but it's also harder on businesses to comply with, like in terms of compliance. So a lot of the smaller businesses that I talk really um, expect and hope for a federal regulation. But in the meantime, I appreciate that, you know, states don't want to wait further either. So I think that is that like pressure level that is hopefully going to move the U.S. Congress in the process as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So let's wait to see how it happens in a like maybe within this year might be the very important update for the AI space in the US registrations. So in the end, I'd like to ask you about the final message for listeners. Because you are staying in Japan, I'm happy to share about with Japanese colleagues and maybe your very important role to ambassador the like different characters of the policy making in between the US and Japan. So happy to share your message. So could you share about it?
Absolutely. First, thank you for asking that question. So I would like to ask your listeners, um, as I'm looking for this research, I'm really like going into the documents since 2015, what Japan has published. I'm using a lot of DeepL to translate from Japanese to English, by the way, which I love the use of AI in that space. So if any of your listeners would like to like direct me to different resources on Japan's approach to AI policy, what are some of the, like I said, social, cultural, geopolitical factors that shape Japan's policy at large, I would be very grateful. Please connect me with on LinkedIn. But also, I would suggest follow us on follow CAIDP Center for AI and Digital Policy on LinkedIn. Uh, Very frequently, we push updates, AI policy updates around the world. We provide immediate analysis, and we also have a newsletter. So each of these, both LinkedIn and our newsletters, has around 60,000 subscribers. So it goes to the inboxes of many AI researchers and policymakers around the world, and we try to provide a global review, not just US or not just EU. So follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our newsletters, and I look forward to hearing more. And thank you for giving me this space today.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the remarkables. That's the your organization is doing very great, and it's very helpful for not just only for the AI researchers, but also practitioners of the businesses or civil actions. So maybe we should check about the updates and how it works. So again, Mark, thank you for joining us today. Then. It's an honor to have a conversation with you online in Japan as well.
It's my honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.